we got adopted.
Over the years, I came to know the full story of what really happened, and she had us when she was 17. I know that she wanted us to have a better life.
The way she saw things going, it wasn't a good environment to raise a kid. The fact that she did that just shows how strong of a woman my mother is.
To just be given a chance to be who she wanted us to be, that means a lot to me.
And I thank her each and every day for it, or I wouldn't be the person who I am today. And I like the person I am today. I've learned that love is what makes people who they are.
I've learned that love helps you make the hard decisions.
Without love, you can't know nurturing, and without nurturing, you can't grow. Yeah, I knew I was loved and I was part of a family, so that was what's important to me. I'm Crystal.
And I'm Christopher.
And our mom chose adoption.
Adoption. Was that not a beautiful video? We're going to be talking about adoption today with a special guest that I met several years ago. And she actually came to California to help promote adoption. Now she's promoting adoption around the country. How much do you know about current adoptions? Well, in this episode, you're going to learn the details and realize that, adoptions are on the down low, that not as many adoptions are happening. And it's because there's lots of ignorance out there. So hopefully, if you're interested in this topic, please listen. It ended up being a great interview. So here you go. So happy to have a guest with us today, special guest. My name is Greg Burt with the California Family Council, Vice President up here in Sacramento. And our guest today is Terri Marcroft. She is the president of an organization called Unplanned Good. This organization started 15 years ago to promote adoption. And Terri and I got to meet each other a little over a year ago at a pro-life event, and she was telling me all the great things her organization was doing, and some things about adoption that I had no really idea about. And our conversations continued, and we ended up this year introducing some legislation in the California Assembly promoting adoption. So I wanted to have you on here, Terri, to kind of explain what you've been doing, not just here in California, but around the country. You're having quite an impact. So welcome.
Thank you so much, Greg. I'm thrilled to be here with you.
So why don't we just kind of get started talking about this organization that you started here in California. It's called Unplanned Good. So why don't you, how did this begin?
So my husband and I were so fortunate to have a really beautiful adoption experience back in 1999. And we were chosen by an expectant woman who was making an adoption plan for her own baby. And so she chose us to become parents of her baby. And then for about a decade, we were just normal parents raising our first and only child. And it was after that time that some of my friends started remarking, how is it so that you were able to adopt a healthy newborn infant in California when it seems so impossible for the average couple these days? And so it's really, it's difficult to adopt a baby in California and actually anywhere in the United States. And that led me to figuring out why that was. I researched the causes for it. And the bottom line is that there are almost 3 million unplanned pregnancies every year in the United States, and less than 1% of those 3 million choose to make an adoption plan. So women really are choosing between abortion and parenting. And so I thought, given our beautiful adoption experience, I really wanted to shout about that from the rooftops and let people know that it was a viable option now.
Wow. I mean, that was one thing that really did shock me. I mean, I've met people growing up who've been adopted.
Sure.
I've been involved with some foreign adoptions when I lived overseas in Hong Kong. So I know a little bit about foreign adoption, but I did not realize that adopting here in the United States was so difficult. And I didn't realize that, I think you had said adoption rates are kind of dropping. And there's, you always hear about young women who find themselves pregnant and alone, and there's pregnancy centers providing services, right, to try and help them not to make the unfortunate decision of choosing abortion, right? But
Right.
why isn't adoption more readily available, or why are, I guess that's my big question, why are so few women choosing to adopt or give up their children for adoption?
Choosing to make an adoption plan. Yeah. Well, the society is telling them that there are two options. You can abort or you can parent. And really, that is the overwhelming message in our country today. There are a lot of reasons for that. It starts with some leftover, very bad or negative experiences from adoption in the 60s and 70s and 80s, where it wasn't the voluntary process that it is today. Because way back in the days when I was in high school, if a girl turned up pregnant in high school, her parents most often forced her into making an adoption decision and sending her to another state often. But it was not the open, transparent, voluntary adoption process that we have today. So things have changed quite a bit for the better. And now, since it is a voluntary process, women can actually make choices about their adoption plan. Because number one, they're the ones who are choosing it rather than having it forced upon them by their parent or by their partner. And number two, they can choose the parents that will raise their child. So with those two huge choices being voluntary at the onset, that is serving to change things quite a bit. But the days of closed adoption, which is what I described in terms of, she made the adoption plan, gave up the baby, so to speak, and then never got to maintain any contact. That was a very traumatic system, really, in the 70s and 80s. It was very hard and very harsh and very traumatic for the woman facing the pregnancy. And so now, with things being more transparent and more open, they've changed quite a bit, especially since the 90s. These women can today make their own decisions, and they can decide on the parents and decide on the faith, decide on the race, decide on the age, decide if they want a stay-at-home mom or a career mom. All of these decisions are up to the woman who's making the adoption plan today, and that makes it a much better experience.
And I'm assuming you believe the more women know about all these options, the details, the more open they would be to actually taking advantage of adoption. Is that right?
The more information they have, yes, the better able they're to make an informed decision, because they're getting all of the relevant information. So that's a big part of it. And then the other half of it is clearing up the misconceptions of the old days, because the misconceptions are, a lot of people still think that adoption means foster care. And so women are repelled by the idea because their knee-jerk reaction is, I would never give up my baby to foster care. I don't want my baby to be bouncing around from one foster home to the next. And that's just a misconception, because voluntary placement with a family who's ready, willing, and able to parent well, that's very different from putting a child into the foster system. They're two different things. And so we need to clear up those misconceptions as well.
Now, your personal story kind of is an example of what adoption could be like. Can you kind of share a little more example about how, I guess, the mother of your daughter found you, right? And how did that work?
Yes. So she found us. She, went through a whole stack of profiles that the adoption agency gave her, and she had certain criteria in her mind what she wanted for the parents of her baby. And in our case, our birth mother, she had three criteria. She wanted to find a couple who was established in their careers, who was second, who was without children so far, and third, who could provide a whole bunch of cousins for her baby. And so I had 16 nieces and nephews at the time that we connected with our birth mother. And so we had a built-in tribe of cousins for her and met all of the criteria. So she decided on us, and she chose us about halfway through her pregnancy, which was a huge blessing to us, to me especially, because she was able to share the second half of her pregnancy with me. She allowed me to go to doctor's appointments with her. She allowed my husband and I to see her first ultrasound and be in the room for her first ultrasound and go shopping for maternity clothes and that kind of thing. So that when the baby actually, when she went into labor and the baby was delivered the middle of August, by then we actually knew each other pretty well and we were comfortable with each other. We'd spent a lot of time together and we were invited to go to the hospital when she was in labor. We got there 2 hours before she delivered. And that was just a very precious time to be able to be there with her, to witness my daughter being born from a vantage point that very few moms have. And my husband was able to cut the cord as well. So it was just, it was truly a beautiful story for us. Yeah.
Wow.
And then from the, pardon me?
Is that typical?
No, I wouldn't say that it's typical that the birth mother is so very generous in allowing
Right.
us into her pregnancy journey. That was, I'd say that was a pretty unusual and just very gracious and giving. So, but after that, so you mentioned the open adoption. We did leave the hospital with a promise that we would send photos every other month because this is before we all had cameras on our cell phones. And so we promised to send photos every other month, and that worked out beautifully. I guess you would call that a semi-open adoption where there's information flowing on a regular basis. And then when my daughter was in kindergarten was the first time that our birth mother actually said, "Hey, there's some life changes over here and I want to come and visit you." And so she was able to do that because we'd been exchanging information and Christmas cards and all the rest. So when Sydney was in kindergarten, she came to visit because she had told us that she graduated college and she was planning on joining the military and going into officers training school and requesting to be sent to Iraq. And she said in her Christmas note, "In case I don't come back, I want to have had a weekend with you guys." And so she did. She came and visited and stayed for a weekend. And that was the beginning of a more open adoption after that.
Wow, that's
So
great.
we've been in touch basically since the hospital.
That's beautiful. So now we know you have had, not only have you been coming to California, where you introduced a couple of bills, you've been traveling the country introducing legislation. So I know there are half a dozen bills you said you passed in Idaho and another one passed in Texas. Can you tell us about how did legislation become the avenue for promoting adoption?
Well, the first request was to change the situation where women are choosing between abortion and parenting. So that's an educational project. That's a raising awareness about adoption. And so I thought it would be a good idea to change that through the schools and have the schools include adoption information when they do the health ed and the sex ed classes in junior high and high school. If they're talking about contraception already, then why not include adoption? And so I talked with the Idaho superintendent of education about that. And she said, "Great, if you can find a curriculum that covers adoption and adds that because we want to replace ours anyway, then that would be fabulous." So I researched a bunch of curricula and they didn't have much about adoption other than the briefest mention. And so it became a legislative solution that if the curricula didn't include it already, then we needed to just cut to the chase and have a new law on the state code that says health ed classes will cover adoption. And that gave us the opportunity to specify if you're covering adoption, you need to include current adoption practices, meaning modern adoption, open adoption, and then local resources in your community, and then cover the Safe Haven Act so that girls know they have an alternative to abandoning their baby if they gave birth and don't want a parent. So all of that got rolled into the first adoption bill that we passed in the Idaho Senate and House in the 2024 legislative session. That was Senate Bill 1308. And that was the first one. And that summer, I talked about that bill at the Live Action Pro-Life Lawmakers Summit. And as a result of that, I think, and connecting with you at the same time, we got the education bill introduced in 4 states total beyond Idaho. So it turns out part of my education here was that if a bill gets passed in one state, it's much more likely to be taken up and embraced in another state and then introduced by a courageous lawmaker. If you haven't passed it anywhere, then that's a much tougher ask. So
Right.
we did it in California then, and then in Oregon, in New Hampshire, and then Texas. So those are the 4 that introduced after Idaho.
Right.
And
then
yeah.
How did things go in Oregon and New Hampshire?
So in Oregon, it got shut down before committee hearing. So that didn't get off to a very good start. In New Hampshire, lots of iterations, but in general, the bill right now that is specifying it's not adoption information, but it's fetal development information into the health ed classes, which also I think helps the adoption cause when you're able to show students the stages of fetal development through the 9 months. So in New Hampshire, that bill is on its way to the governor right now. And then the Texas bill, which is very much like our Idaho bill, did just get signed by the governor on June 20th. So that went the full gamut to signing, and it's now the law in Texas as well as Idaho.
Wow, that's awesome. Now here in California, in a very blue state where Planned Parenthood seems to have real control over the legislature, we did run into problems. But the exciting thing was that, we went around shopping, shopping for an author, and we had competition. We had 4 different legislators say they were interested, and so we ended up splitting the bill into 2 and giving each legislator a chunk of it. So one of the bills, it was AB 329. This was going to be the sex ed component, where we were going to require that sex ed to include information, more detailed information about adoption. And we got to a committee hearing, but here's what Planned Parenthood wanted. They didn't want the bill to look like it was favoring adoption over abortion. And so they wanted to add in a lot of information about abortion, which us being a pro-life organization, we're not particularly interested in doing. And so we'll have to figure out a way around that in the future. The other bill was an AB 1453, and this was simply going to require that all college and university healthcare centers provide women with adoption information when they come in for services, whether they got a pregnancy test, whether they were getting treatment for sexually transmitted diseases, right? They were going to get adoption information. And I thought it was going to pass. The author thought it was going to get through the first committee, but he got hung up with Planned Parenthood again. I guess they were fearful about when the information was actually going to be given them. There was a little confusion about that. They didn't want anyone to get information about adoption after they had already made a decision about abortion, right? And so Planned Parenthood suggested, well, why don't we just give them adoption information if they ask for it? Well, that's a bit ridiculous as well. So we're still in negotiations on that bill. It's not completely dead, but hopefully it'll come back next year. That's what we're hoping.
Yes.
But that's what it's like in a blue state.
Right. Even though we had over 25 individuals and organizations who provided letters of support for those 2 bills. So that was a really nice show of support from our community.
Absolutely. So we're not giving up. Yeah. We're coming back. But But I know
Right.
that you also aren't just working state by state. Now you are working on a federal level. You have a new coalition you guys are calling the Third Option Coalition, and
Right.
working to get some funding to promote adoption. Why don't you tell us a little about what that project is?
Yeah. So the Third Option Coalition is a group of very passionate pro-adoption nonprofit leaders, and they're from all kinds of organizations. You know, the Justice Foundation, Brave Love, the Alliance for Christian Adoptions. Just there are probably 10 organizations that are a part of our coalition. What we're thinking is that if we can tap into some federal funding, divert it from the abortion providers, and channel the money into adoption awareness and birth mother care. For one thing, we're thinking that's a whole lot more constructive use of funds. But also, if we can get federal money to do state level programs, then that would be where the power is. You know, that's where the work needs to be done, is on the ground in the states. And so, in order to get that moving, I'm creating a pilot state here in Idaho where they're going to be the leader to get it done first, I believe. And in order to pave the way for that, we passed a resolution in the last session which says that federal money coming from the federal government to the states for this purpose of third option programs, those will be used for either adoption awareness or birth mother care. And so the funds will be received and will be put to use by that for that purpose. And there's a place within the Department of Health and Welfare in Idaho where there are people who are ready, willing, and able to take these funds and apply them for those kinds of programs. So that required getting the leadership of health and welfare on board here in the state of Idaho. And they've been doing so much good work in terms of adoption reform anyway that it makes a lot of sense that Idaho can jump on this first as well. But having the legislature say, yes, we're willing to accept the money from DC and we're willing to put it to use in this purpose, that was a big step forward. So our Department of Health and Welfare leader, his name is Alex Adams. He's been tapped by the Trump administration to head up child and family services within HHS. So he will be reporting to RFK if he is confirmed when his Senate hearing happens next month. And so he's all on board with adoption, and he's paved the way here in Idaho by setting aside some people on his team at Health and Welfare. But also, when he's confirmed and goes to DC, then he's going to have this perspective or these sensitivities in his job at HHS. So that'll be very exciting to see him get into that position there. So, yep, third option states. Sorry.
I'm sorry. I was just saying that a lot of people have been working for a long time to try and get Planned Parenthood defunded, and for the federal government to change their ways and start funding, a pro-life option that values human life and doesn't end in the destruction of human life. So I wish you well. I hope you have great success.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's been very exciting, and we're looking forward to coming full circle here and getting these programs going. We're expecting to have our website launch in about a month, I'm hoping.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Well, just to conclude here, for folks who, aren't involved in government per se, but they want to promote adoption in their own communities. They want to do something locally. They want to know how they can help you and your organization in their church. What do you tell people who love adoption, just love what their heart is for kids who are adopted and mothers who they want to choose adoption? What can they do? How can they involve themselves in your organization?
A couple of things. One is just to be aware of how adoption works these days, because if you understand our national standard, which is open adoption, if you understand it well enough to explain it to someone else, there's a good chance that someone in your community is going to be facing an unplanned pregnancy. So there could be someone in your neighborhood, in your family, in your school, in your church. So be ready to talk about open adoption. That's the first thing, and why it's considered to be so much healthier than the days of closed adoption. So getting educated on current practices is a big first step. And then secondly, I just gave at National Adoption Conference was last week, and I just gave a 90-minute talk there on getting state legislation passed and hoping that people would become activists in this area, because every state has different adoption laws, and from one to the next they differ greatly. You might see things that are not okay about your adoption laws in your own state, and you can take up the challenge, you can take up that banner and get involved in state legislation, because there are groups like yours at Family Research Council who are really willing to help so much if people have the passion and the ideas to make change happen. So I would say get involved politically and legislatively. Because I had no credentials to start on this journey 2 years ago. One of the slides I put up last week was a blank slide entitled "My Experience in This Area." So anybody can get involved, and if you're passionate about it, the changes that you can make, even just as one person, by embracing your friends in the cause, it can make changes. It can big things can happen.
Right. And that's the kind of people you're the kind of person we love to help, right? Someone who doesn't know how the legislators, how it works, how to introduce a bill. You had the idea, and we just knew all the people and the process, and our two organizations joined together, and it worked out perfect. I've had other folks come to me with the same way. They had some idea, they had to know how the process works, and they go, "What can I do?" And so those are the kind of people I love to help. So it was my joy to help you in your cause, and California Family Council is eager to promote what you're all about, because it just coincides with what we believe, right? The value of human life. And so I would encourage folks to go to your website, and maybe you can give the website address, but I just went on there a couple of days ago and was listening to some of the testimonials, even from the adoptees, and it was just beautiful, and just it was great. And so other people, that's what you can do. You can take those videos, testimonials, and share them on your social media. So
right, or even write your own story and send it in. The website is unplannedgood.org, and you're right. A lot of the heavy lifting is done by the personal stories on the website. And that's where people get affirmed that this could be a good option and it could have a really nice, beautiful ending. So unplannedgood.org is the website.
Well, thanks so much for being with us. And I know we're going to be working with each other in the future. So fabulous. I'm sure we'll be doing more videos and informing our folks and our supporters about your good work. So thanks so much.
Greg, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the work you do at California Family Council and look forward to continuing next year.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed that interview with Terri. We have lots of other interviews and podcasts for you to view on our YouTube channel and our various social media. Please take advantage of that. Go to our website, californiafamily.org, for all the information. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time.